Up from Slavery is a book written by Booker T. Washington, that writer, speaker, activist from many years ago. And in his book, he describes once meeting an ex-slave from Virginia. And this is what he said about it. He said, "I found that this man had made a contract with his owner 2 or 3 years prior to the Emancipation Proclamation. That agreement to the effect was that the slave was to be permitted to buy his own freedom by paying so much a year for himself. And while he was paying this, he was permitted to work and do labor wherever he needed to do it. Finding that he could secure better wages in Ohio, the slave went there to work and to purchase his freedom. When freedom came, that is the Emancipation Proclamation, when freedom came, he was still in debt to his master some $300. Notwithstanding that the Emancipation Proclamation freed him from any obligation to his master, this man walked the greater portion of the distance back to where his old master had lived in Virginia. And he placed the last dollar with interest in his former master's hands." In talking to me about this, Mr. Washington said, "The man told me that he knew that he did not have to pay his debt back, but that he had given his word, and that his word had never been broken. He felt that he could not enjoy his freedom until he had fulfilled his promise." Unfortunately, guarantees and promises from one human being to another are not always so secure. In fact, guarantees and promises are regularly broken between people, human beings, between groups of people. Many times, the guarantees are broken because there are circumstances that arise that we just could not have anticipated prior to making the guarantee. Some of you may have had a situation where you promised or guaranteed someone something, and something happened that was simply beyond your ability to control, and you were not able to fulfill what you said you would do. In spite of the fact that you wanted to, you just couldn't. And then in other times, guarantees or promises are broken simply because we become weary of attempting to fulfill them, or simply because we no longer feel like it's necessary. I watch it in professional sports all the time. An athlete will sign a contract for a certain amount of money for a certain length of time. And on the other hand, that team will sign him to that contract based upon an anticipation of performance. And in some cases, that athlete will perform well beyond the salary that he had secured. And so in many cases, those athletes will hold out. They will not come to camp, whether it be football or spring training for baseball or basketball, and they will wait until the team guarantees them a new contract at a higher price. And some people say, well, that athlete is not holding up his word. Well, in other cases, the athlete performs well below the salary guaranteed in the contract. He does not perform up to that contract. And sometimes the teams are allowed to simply release them and not fulfill their end of the contract. So in both cases, many times, promises and guarantees are broken by human beings. Happens all the time. Yet, when God makes a guarantee, nothing arises that He did not anticipate. Nothing comes up that He cannot control. When God guarantees something, He never becomes sidetracked so that He won't fulfill it. When God makes a promise and a prophecy and a guarantee, it will be fulfilled in His timing. This morning, I want to take a look at some thoughts about the guarantee of God. If you have your Bibles with you, why don't you turn to the book of Genesis, chapter 47. Genesis chapter 47. This is the third message out of Genesis 47. We have for weeks now been following the life of Joseph. What a magnificent story. In all honesty, I can't say that I've ever preached all the way through from beginning to end the life of Joseph. Of course, we're following the life of Joseph only in the context that we're preaching through the book of Genesis. And now as we near the end, Joseph's story, there's Abraham, there's Isaac, there's Jacob, and there's Joseph, the four patriarchs of the book of Genesis. And Joseph has more written about him in the book of Genesis than any other patriarch. That is significant. And so chapter 47 finds Joseph as the most powerful man in Egypt except Pharaoh. Chapter 47 finds Joseph's family, his brothers, his father, their wives, their children, their livestock, their herds, coming down to Egypt from Canaan during an extreme famine. Chapter 47 finds Joseph introducing his father and his brothers to Pharaoh. Chapter 47 finds Jacob, Joseph's father, weather-beaten, leather-skinned, shriveled, 130 years old. It finds Jacob blessing Pharaoh, the most powerful man on earth. And then chapter 47 finds Joseph not only receiving all the money, all the lands, all the livestock, and even all the property of all the Egyptians and Canaanites in return for food. He ultimately buys everything they have, including themselves, then turns it back over to them once the years of famine have ended, and Joseph becomes a hero. Some of you may remember reading the book of Genesis. As it begins, the book of Genesis says a new Pharaoh came into power and he did not remember Joseph. I got to tell you, seems like Joseph would be pretty hard to forget. He saved your whole country, dude. It just goes to show you what we do here on earth. I don't care how famous, how well known we are. What we do here on earth eventually is forgotten. I don't care how well known you are. What you do for eternity, that's what counts. And so here we are in chapter 47. Joseph has become a hero. Joseph has not only allowed the people now to receive back the seed and the land that he had bought from them during the famine. Now they're replanting their lands. And as we come to the end of chapter 47, we have a short passage that I simply could not find any way to include this passage in one of the earlier messages of chapter 47. It is just distinct. But it is not the only one of its kind. In this passage, Jacob calls Joseph to himself. Jacob is aware that he doesn't have much longer to live. And by much longer, he has quite a few years to live, but in comparison to the 130 he's already lived, he's on the last stretch. Let's put it that way, right? And so Jacob calls Joseph to himself and asks Joseph a favor, a commitment after he dies. The thing I love about Jacob's request is on the outside, it looks as if he's simply asking Joseph to fulfill a logistical request related to his burial. Now, many of you have maybe parents who have gone on. And near the parent's death, maybe they were ill, they came to you and they talked to you about things they wanted for their funeral. I remember when my father was just a couple of months away from passing, some 5.5 years ago, when he was up in East Tennessee, and we went back and forth a lot to be able to be with him. And when I'd go up there, basically, I'd just sit by his bedside and we'd talk and share. And there were things he told me about his funeral. He wanted me to preach his funeral. That's pretty natural. He asked me if I would be okay with that. And there were certain things I remember him telling me. Well, Jacob's not quite to that point. He's not lying on his deathbed. but he is well on into his life. Some of you who are here and healthy today, but who have spent many years on this earth, you've gone to family members and said, hey, I may have a year left, I may have a decade left, but here are some things that I want for my funeral, for my passing. Not just a will, but things that where you want to be buried. Many of you have already bought your burial plots. And you may be here another 20 years, but you've got those burial plots. You know where you want to be buried. That is essentially what Jacob is about to ask Joseph. But for Jacob, the request to be buried in another land is not based upon logistics. It is based upon the promise and the guarantee of God. Read with me as we begin in Genesis chapter 47, verse 27. So Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. And Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. And so the length of Jacob's life was 147 years. When the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, now, if I have found favor in your sight, please put your hand under my thigh and deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he said, that is Joseph, I will do as you have said. Then he said, that is Jacob, swear to me. And he swore to him. So Israel bowed himself on the head of the bed. The request Jacob makes to the request Israel makes here is a request based upon the promises of God. The promise of God to Jacob's ancestors to plant Israel in a land flowing with milk and honey. The promise God made to Jacob's ancestors to plant Israel and make them an enormous nation and to give them a promised land. It is that land in which Jacob wants to be buried. And it's not because he thinks once he's gone, his body is more special in one piece of dirt than it is another. It is that he wants to clearly establish, this is the land of my family. This is the land of Israel that is in Canaan where he'll be buried, not because it's my preference, but because God promised. Folks, listen. God's given us some guarantees. And in these next few moments, I want to share with you 3 images of God's guarantee. Listen, there are promises in God's Word that are true and are accurate and are guaranteed to us. And while whatever it is you're facing today, whatever your trial may be, as extreme or as small as it may be, make no mistake about it. Just because you're facing trial, just because you're facing heartache, just because you're facing difficulty, it does not change the guarantee of God. We're not going to get to fulfilling the guarantee and God's going to say, well, you didn't look at the fine print. My guarantee only works on years ending in 3. We're not going to get to the end of things and God's going to say, yeah, I know I gave you this guarantee never to leave you or forsake you. I know I gave you this guarantee for the bodily resurrection. But see, that guarantee only works for people whose third letter of their middle name is an R. I mean, God's not going to come and give us fine print. God's guarantee is absolutely true. And for Christians, listen, His guarantee hinges on a person, not a theory, not a philosophy, not an idea, but on a person. His name is Jesus Christ. So let's for a few moments consider some images for you. My prayer is that these images would encourage you. That you would walk away from here going, you know what? Here are some things I can bank on. I've not seen this guarantee fulfilled yet. I've not seen what I think God is doing in my life fulfilled yet. But because of these images, I can be reminded, I can be encouraged, and I can press on and trust the guarantee of God in my life. Back to verse 27 of Genesis 47. It says that Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, sort of. Egypt was the empire at that time. Egypt owned a lot of land. And so there was Egypt proper, which, by the way, was North Africa. It's and still is, North Africa. But Egypt, as the empire, as the most powerful nation on earth, had other lands that were outside of Egypt proper. And so Goshen was kind of one of those lands. It wasn't in the specific geographical boundaries of Egypt proper, but it was just outside of that, and it was Egyptian property. And Goshen was along the Nile River. It was a very fertile land, and if you'll recall, it was a land that would be perfect for a bunch of sheep herders like Joseph's family, and Jacob and all of his family and his herds and flocks and his sons. And so Joseph's family, while Joseph went back to live in the area of Pharaoh in the royal city because of his position and his power, Joseph's family lived just outside of Egypt in Goshen, and they raised their sheep. And according to verse 27, they got rich. I want to point something out to you that we may or may not, I don't remember if I really pointed it out last week. The one group of people that seemed immune to the famine, the one group of people who seemed not to be forced to sell their lands and their flocks and everything to Joseph and to Egypt, was Joseph's family down in the area of Goshen. And so here they were. And because of that, by verse 27, it says they had possessions there and grew and multiplied. That word multiplied means abundant, numerous. I mean, they've got all kinds of stuff that grew. And so as we look at what's happening here, in just a moment, we're going to see Jacob's request. But prior to Jacob's request, the Bible mentions the prosperity of the Israelites. And I'm just curious, in this passage, which 28 through 31 deals with Jacob's request, but 1 verse 27 gives kind of a commentary on their prosperity. And I began to look at this passage, and I thought, why, in a passage based on that hinges on, that's all about Jacob's request, Israel's request of Joseph, and a passage that's all about that, why would one verse at the beginning make an editorial comment, that is, about the prosperity of Jacob and his family? And then I thought, you know what? This passage is all about Jacob trusting the guarantee of God. And one of the reasons Jacob could trust the guarantee of God was the present affirmation he had in the prosperity of his family. I'm not saying that prosperity is always your present affirmation, but I am saying this. If you want to be able to trust the guarantee of God, you need to be able to see how God is affirming it in your life right now. Not yesterday, we'll look at that later. Not tomorrow, we'll also look at that later. I'm talking about ways in which God is affirming His promises to you right now. Now, I know there are those times where we're looking around and we're saying, Pastor Johnny, you just don't know what's going on in my life right now. I just can't see where God's affirming anything. Things just don't look so good to me. Things just look bad. And if we're not careful, you will spend so much time seeing that which is not right, you will completely miss ways in which God is affirming His promises to you. Sometimes people come to me and they say, Pastor, I don't like this or I don't like that. And I have begun, when someone comes to me, oftentimes I'll say, okay, you've shared with me what you're concerned about, what you're upset about, what you're worried about. Now you tell me one thing you're thankful about. Because if we're not careful, we'll spend our lives day and day and we will major on that which is not right, because I think as human beings, we just tend to gravitate that way. And why is it that 98% of the news is bad news? And it's because that's where the ratings go. Why is it that the Weather Channel ratings triple during a hurricane? Even if it's not a hurricane hitting us, because we want to know about it. Say, Pastor Johnny, I want to be informed. I got that. But hurricane's not necessarily good news. And so too often, we tend to gravitate toward that which is not positive, but which is negative. And if we're not careful, we'll do that so much, we're completely missing every single day where God is doing things in our lives that are establishing and reassuring His guarantee and His promise. He's affirming it to you, folks. You say, Pastor Johnny, yeah, maybe to everybody else, but not to me. I will tell you, I could get you in a line, and I could one by one talk to you, and you could tell me about all the things that are going wrong, and I'll guarantee you, if we talked, I could help you see some affirmations in your life that God's giving you to show you that His guarantee is still intact. There are present affirmations. My dear bride and I, we run together pretty regularly. And from time to time, we go out and do these 5K races because I guess it just kind of gives us something to work towards when we run, so we don't just run aimlessly, like Paul said. We have a target. Last November, we ran in a very unique race. It was a 5K, and it was down at Disney in Orlando. And some of you who know us know we're big Disney folks. We love going down there and spending time in that area. And this particular 5K was a race through one of the parks, through the Animal Kingdom Park. And so we all traveled down there and we stayed overnight. And the next morning, Ellison and I got up some awful hour. I don't know, it was about 4:30, I think we got out of bed. And everybody else was, they were sleeping, all the kids were. So we got out and we went out to the race. We got there that morning, and just so you'll know, there were 5,000 people in this race, in this one, and they divided us up into groups. And when you registered, you were supposed to put your approximate time that you run, and they divided you into groups according to time. The fastest people they put in the front group, and that way. So you don't have the really fast people in the back trying to weave their way through slow people, all that kind of thing. And so we got there and got in line to have our picture taken with Mickey Mouse or something, all that kind of good stuff. There were people in costumes and outfits. It was just a great big event in many cases. And so finally, I think the race started maybe around 7:30 or something like that. And we all got in our places and got ready to start. And as we took off, the race started out on the very edge of the parking lot of the Animal Kingdom. It's just out kind of in the middle of nowhere at that time, because what later that day would be packed with cars then was completely empty. And so we started our race. And about the first, mile or so was through the parking lot. But I was so intrigued by two things. One, I was intrigued by the costumes some of these people wore. There are these 3 women that showed up dressed like Christmas trees to run a 5K. I'm not kidding. They had Christmas trees on their heads sticking up. I'm not kidding. And they walked most of the race, which I understand. There was another couple dressed up as the toy soldiers, or dressed up as like toy soldiers, and they ran. And so there were all these costumes, plus we were weaving in and out of the people who lied about their time because they were slow and we had to run around them. Now, I'm not saying I'm that fast, but there were people slower than me. I'm just saying that. And so all this while, I really didn't think, see, when I run, here's the thing about running, it makes my legs hurt. It makes my chest tight. It makes me breathe hard, and it's uncomfortable. But the funny thing was, as we started the race, I'm looking around at these costumes and outfits and weaving through. I'm not really thinking about my chest heaving in and out and my legs hurting that first mile or so. I'm not really thinking about it. You say, Pastor John, it's only the first mile. Exactly. It's usually, I'm half a mile in, man. I'm struggling usually. So then about a mile in, we went into the park itself. And we're running through the park, and we've got Minnie Mouse pretzel stand, and we've got animals in the Animal Kingdom we're running by, and we're looking at the animals, and there are all kinds of sights and exhibits there in the Animal Kingdom that as we're running through, we're looking at all these things. And I got to be honest with you, I didn't really think about my legs that were hurting or my chest that was heaving. Because I was so preoccupied with all the neat things that I was looking at, I didn't think about the difficulty. Within the last, I don't know, maybe 3/4 of a mile or so, we came out of the park and we headed across the empty, dark, paved parking lot. And after I got out in the parking lot, I began to notice just exactly how tired my legs were. And I began to notice just how much my chest was heaving at running. And I thought, what happened? Man, I was feeling pretty good a few minutes ago. You know what I realized? I didn't have anything else nice or inviting or entertaining or pretty to look at. All it was the parking lot. It's amazing how motivating it could be when we set our eyes on that which is good, that which is beautiful, that which is nice, that which is intriguing. And I'm telling you, just like that run we made back in November is the same for your life. If you wake up in the mornings and you set your eyes on a dark, dank, empty, hopeless world, you will feel that way. But if you choose to say, God, I know you are affirming your guarantee in my life. Help me to see those affirmations in my life. And if you wake up day to day looking at the affirmations God's put in your life, I'm telling you, it will change the way you live every day. Present affirmations of His guarantee. God puts things around us all the time to affirm His guarantees. But Pastor Johnny, sometimes I don't see Him. Well, that's true. Sometimes you've got to choose to see Him. And it changes your progress. It changes the way you move. You know, in Hebrews 12:2, it says that Jesus endured the cross. Now, we've gone through all that Jesus faced on the cross at times, and you've read books about it or you've seen things about it, and the nails and the persecution and the being beaten beyond recognition. I mean, what would it allow a man to persevere through that? You know what Romans 12:2 says? It said that He endured the cross and He despised the shame. That is, He ignored the shame, but for the joy set before Him. Pastor Johnny, what was that joy? You listen to me. You ready? It was you, and it was me, and it was all those who will come to know Christ because of His crucifixion. That is, He had so much. He had a lot more bad to look at than good at the cross, but He chose to set His face and His eyes on the joy before Him, and that was His redemption, His creatures, His children. And if Christ can do that for the cross, if Christ can endure the cross for that, how much more us and the trials we face every day? Present affirmations. I'm not talking about health and wealth or name it, claim it. I'm not talking about some do-it-yourself book. I'm not talking about some book in the bookstore that all it talks about is stay positive. What I'm talking about is setting your eyes on the affirmations Christ is putting in your life that allows you to make progress. And so you want to be able to continue to pursue the guarantee of God that He's made in your life. Whatever it is you're facing right now, by God's grace, why don't we choose to set our eyes on His current affirmations? And then look at verse 28. After this statement was made about the great progress Jacob's family had made. Listen, Jacob could have been complaining about being pulled up and transplanted from Canaan. Jacob could have been complaining about, they stuck us out here in Goshen, way out from Egypt. There are so many things Jacob could have been complaining about, but what we see here in verse 27 is not a complaint, but a statement about the affirmation God was making in their life. And then in verse 28, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. He was 130 when he arrived, so that makes him 147. At this point, he's near the end of his life. 147, that's old. That's living a long time. Now, thankfully, I can say that because there's nobody in here who's 147 and go, what do you mean that's old? I'm 147. Be offended by it. So that's old. But here's the thing. Earlier in this chapter, Pharaoh asks Jacob, how old are you? And he said, my days are few and evil. And at that time, he was 130. Few? I'm not even sure I want to live to be 130, to tell you the truth. That's a long time. And here he's 147, and that would seem like a very, very, very long time to us. And yet his father and his grandfather, Isaac, lived 180, and Abraham lived 175. Jacob understood that there were decisions he made earlier in his life as a trickster, as a hustler, as a heel holder, a tripper-upper. Remember that? He understood that there were things he did and decisions he made earlier in his life that has affected him even when he's 147 years old. I'm going to say it again. I said it last week. Young people, listen to me. If decisions Jacob made when he was younger are still affecting him when he's 147, make no mistake about it. Decisions you make right now as a teenager, as a child, as a young adult can and will still affect you even 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. And so Jacob, he's 147. Verse 29, when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph and said to him, now if I have found favor in your sight, which more since I have found favor in your sight, he knows it's true. Put your hand under my thigh. This is a kind of an act. We're making an agreement, a contract, if you will. In fact, this symbol is used earlier in the book of Genesis 2. I think it was with Isaac. Put your hand under my thigh. They're kind of making a contract, if you will. And deal kindly and truly with me. Please do not bury me in Egypt, but let me lie with my fathers. What's the point? Now, I know some of you have family burial areas or cemeteries, family cemeteries, maybe a church, maybe it's nowhere around here, maybe it's another state, maybe it's another city, and that's where you want to be buried. I know plenty of times where people who have lived in Warner Robins for decades, when they pass, they're actually buried somewhere else. Maybe it's a family cemetery. And there's certain reasons for that. It's sentimental. We're all gathered there together where my people are, that kind of thing. But for Jacob, there's some of that. All of that's true, but there's much, much more. See, where Jacob was going to be buried, he wanted his body there because he wanted to establish it as kind of, hey, I'm saving your place, Joseph. I'm saving your place, family. This is where we will one day be. This is our promised land. You say, Pastor Johnny, how do you know that? Well, if you go back to Genesis chapter 12, don't turn there. You can write it down if you want to. Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, God first came to Abraham. God came to Abraham and he said, Abraham, get up out of your land and go to a land I'll show you. And when you get to that land, you will have descendants that can't even be numbered. And whoever blesses you, I will bless. And whoever curses you, I will curse. And I will give you land and I will give you descendants. And this is my promise to you, Abraham. You just need to follow me. And Abraham did. Jacob is saying, I want to be buried in Canaan as a statement. I still believe the promise God gave my granddaddy. And God gave my daddy Isaac. Because God came along in Isaac's life and reestablished that promise that he had started in Genesis chapter 12. He reestablished it, by the way, in Genesis chapter 23. Jacob is saying, I believe God's guarantee, and while I needed to live the last 17 years of my life in Egypt, that's true, I want to go back and be buried in Canaan as a statement of promise. If I'm buried here in Goshen, descendants who come after me, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, they might think somehow that we're supposed to settle in Goshen, and that's not where we're supposed to be ultimately. We are supposed to be in Canaan, the promised land. Look at what Jacob's doing. He is trusting God's guarantee by using past reminders of his guarantee. If verse 27 is a present affirmation of God's guarantee to Jacob, verses 28 through 30 is a past reminder of that same guarantee. That is, there are things we can look back on and say, you know what? Maybe God's guarantee isn't looking so good right now to me, but if I look back, I am reminded that there are things God's done in my life, and I cannot deny the fact that He did them for me, and so I still trust His guarantee because of them. Jacob was not just banking on the things God had told him. He was banking on the great things God had done for him and his father and his grandfather, Isaac and Abraham. Oh, Jacob. Every one of us, by the way, every one of us, if you're a Christian, you have things in your past that God has done for you. That even if right now you're having trouble trusting God's guarantee, maybe what you need to do is look back and say, what did God do for me in the past that I could say, you know what, God is faithful. I can still trust His guarantee. And if you're a Christian, if you have nothing else to look for than just salvation, that's enough. I can look back when I confessed Christ as my Savior, when I turned to Him. And if God never did another thing for me other than what He did for me at the day of my conversion, that is, He rescued me from hell. He established my name in the Lamb's Book of Life. He's got me a seat in heaven. When I leave this earth, folks, this earth can't touch me. If it kills me, I'm with Jesus. If it leaves me here, I serve Jesus. It can't touch me. If God never did another thing for me, but when He saved my soul and now He's growing me in Him, that's enough to look back at past reminders that His guarantee is true. But here's the reality, and you all can probably agree with this. Even beyond salvation, God's done a lot more things for you too. If salvation was all, that's enough. But that's not all. You know it. And sometimes when you're struggling in the day, and I get it. Look, I get it. Things hit us that we did not expect. They throw us off balance. It's like walking down the sidewalk with a storefront on your side, and someone walks out of the storefront real fast and bumps into you, and you lose your balance. And sometimes it takes you a minute, right? Sometimes life's like that. Something just wham, it hits us. And at first we have a little difficulty seeing God's guarantee in it. But that's okay. But we're not going to stay there, are we? Because if we need to look up and say, wait just a second, while I'm regaining my equilibrium, let me look to see at the present affirmations God's putting in my life to remind me of His guarantee. And if that's hard to find, let me look back to see what God's done for me, to know that He's still the same God. I'm just wondering, the God who converted you, the God who saved your soul from sin last year or last decade or however long ago it was, is He still the same God? Then if He is, I can look back on what He did for me. Say, you know what? Even if I can't find anything in the present, I can look back and say, what He did for me then, He's still capable of doing for me now because He's the same God. He's the same Savior. Past reminders of His guarantee. That's what Jacob's looking at. In verse 30, finish reading that. You shall carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And Joseph said, I will do as you have said. And then watch this. And then Jacob said, swear to me. And Joseph swore to him. It was kind of an agreement. So Israel bowed himself on the head of his bed. This is kind of an odd phrase, because the beds in those Middle Eastern times were more just mats. Many believe he actually got up and leaned over on his cane as part of the event to establish the covenant. Either way, what Jacob is asking is incredibly important to him, yes? What Jacob is asking is establishing the reality of God's promise for the promised land. What Jacob is asking is to reaffirm God's promise. And yet what Jacob is asking, he will not be there to make sure that it happens, will he? Joseph, you've got to tell me you'll bury me in Canaan. I mean, obviously, Jacob's not going to be alive to make sure it happens. I see it happen all the time when I do funerals. Maybe a request of the deceased. Sometimes it's just beyond the family's control. They can't make it happen, something they requested. And sometimes they just don't, whatever the case might be. But Jacob, this is serious. This is not just, I want to be buried in my blue shirt. This is, I want you to take me as a statement of the promise of God for the future of our nation. But he wouldn't be there to make sure it would happen. But here's Jacob. You know what his hope was in? Certainly that he trusted Joseph to a degree, but his hope was in God. Sometimes we need to look around at the affirmations God's given us in the present to remind us of His guarantee. Yes? Sometimes we need to look back and say, I know what God's done in my life, and He's still the same God, so I'm going to trust Him to fulfill His guarantee. And sometimes we look into the future and you say, you know what? I have a hope that's coming, and I can trust God's guarantee because of what He has promised in the future. Let me tell you how much God has promised it to Christians. God has promised a future where Christ returns, Christians are resurrected bodily, and God establishes a new heaven and a new earth. And I am increasingly bent toward the idea that heaven and earth are kind of going to be one big community. And however He does that, whether He builds a bridge across or whatever, if you look at Revelation 21, it says that Jerusalem's coming out of heaven as a bride adorned for it. It seems that heaven is coming down to earth and they all become one thing, and we're all going to live there in resurrected bodies. And your picture of heaven, unfortunately, sometimes it's been tainted by artist renderings and a lot of stuff. Picture earth as perfect as it can be. Picture earth absolutely perfect. Well, we can't. It's hard to do. But I'm convinced that's very much what heaven's going to be. It's us living as human beings on a place that's absolutely perfected. God has guaranteed us that. And let me tell you how much He's guaranteed. He said, if that's not true, then everything we believe is a lie. He is so certain. He wanted us to be so certain, to look ahead and say, you know what, Pastor? If the bodily resurrection, if heaven, if a redeemed life, if all that eternal life, if that's not true, then nothing we say here at any time on this church campus has ever been true or will ever be true. That's how serious the hope is we have in the future. And sometimes we need to look around in the present affirmations, and sometimes we need to be encouraged by looking back to see what God's done. But all the time, we can look ahead and say, but you know what? If none of that's true in the present, if I can't find anything, if none of that's true in the past, I can't find anything. Here's what I know. What's coming in the future is so guaranteed. God said if it doesn't happen, none of this is true. So I know that it is. Hope for God is not looking ahead to say, this probably will happen. I hope it will. Hope for God is saying, no, it's already happened. You just haven't experienced it yet, personally. So it's a future hope of His guarantee. Folks, we have help in the present, we have help in the past, and we have help in the future to verify the guarantee of God. When God makes a guarantee, it will be fulfilled in His time. Human beings, we're not as good at that, but God, He's perfect. The Christian scholar, one of my favorite authors, is C.S. Lewis. The Chronicles of Narnia, Mere Christianity, the Screwtape Letters. If you've never read any of those, I would highly recommend it. He took his faith seriously, by the way, and he took truth seriously. And he was always determined to pay what he had vowed he would pay. In his biography called Shadowlands, his biography called Shadowlands, he tells about a promise he had made to his buddy during World War I. He and his buddy made a promise to each other. If one or the other died in the war and the other one lived, the one who lived would make sure that the deceased one's family was taken care of. And C.S. Lewis's buddy had a wife and a child, and he was very concerned about them being taken care of if he died during the war. And so, as it would happen, his friend did die. He was killed in a battle. And so C.S. Lewis, after the war was over, looked after them as he said he would. True to his word, Lewis took care of his friend's family. And here's the thing, and he talks about this in this biography. No matter how helpful he tried to be to this woman and her child, the woman was ungrateful. She was rude. She was verbally abusive to him. She was arrogant. She was domineering. It was really a very difficult thing for C.S. Lewis to do. Through it all, Lewis said he kept forgiving her, and he refused to let her actions determine whether he would fulfill a promise. I'm so glad the God of the universe saves us not because our actions are good, but in spite of them. I'm so glad our God keeps us saved, not because of our behavior, but sometimes in spite of it. I'm so glad our God promises to sanctify us and to perfect us one day, and He will. Not because of who I am or what I've done, but because He is a God who fulfills His guarantee. There's somebody here today, and you needed to hear this. Because you're kind of walking through a time in your life, and you're just wondering if God's really going to do what He said He'd do for you. And could I suggest to you today, maybe your need is to look around and see His affirmations in your life. Maybe people, maybe experiences. Maybe you need to look back and see what He's done in your life and be reminded He's the same God. He's going to fulfill that guarantee. Or maybe you need to spend some time looking into God's Word at the future. Say, I've got some hope. God's going to fulfill His guarantee in my life. But can I suggest to you this? If you're here today and you've never trusted Christ as your Savior, we saw Marquez and Miss Tina earlier today be baptized. They came to know Christ as their Savior, and they're following Him. And we have many in this room who have done that. But I'm telling you, if that's not you, if you've never done that, if you don't know for certain that you will spend eternity in heaven if you were to leave this earth today, that's where it begins. How do I say this? God's guarantee does not apply until you begin to trust Him in salvation. I could even restate that God's guarantee does apply even to a lost person, the guarantee that you will spend eternity apart from Him if you leave this world without Him. And maybe today's the day for you to come and say, Pastor Johnny, I would like to talk to somebody about how to be saved, about how to trust Christ as my Savior. And in just a moment, I'm going to invite you to come. At least talk to somebody. Nobody's going to pressure you into making a decision. Just talk to somebody, at least so you'll know what it means to be saved. Or maybe Christians, maybe today God, through His Word, just encouraged you. And you want to come and just get at this altar and pour your heart out before the Lord and say, Lord, thank you for encouraging me in the present, in the past, in the future. Thank you. Maybe you know someone not here today. They're not here. You wish they were. You want to come pray for them? Come on. Lord, help them to see your guarantee is faithful. You come on. Now I'm going to pray and we're going to stand. And I want you just to obey the Lord. Father, right now, help us that we would respond to your leading in Jesus' name. Why don't you stand?